Thank you for joining us today. You are listening to a message from Firehouse Prayer Furnace and Church. For more information, please go to www.frontlinefire.org.
Now, I have a really basic question. It's very simple. I want to explain something to you now so you know how I operate. I may ask a question, it may be a trick question, so be careful how you answer. But this question is simple. How many of you want to look more like Jesus? Okay. Thank you for answering yes. Unfortunately, you may not be pleased with that answer. Here's why. There are three primary tools that God uses to produce His image in us. And most of the time, we don't talk about them nowadays. But the three tools that the Lord has spoken to me about are called the pruning hook, the scourging whip, and the wilderness embrace. And in our modern teaching and in much of our grace-filled churches, we don't like anything that involves pain or a negative connotation. And yet the problem is Jesus modeled these things for us. And so I'm going to go through some scripture, and I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to read it to you. It may be in your benefit just to write the reference down, because I'm going to move quickly, because I don't want to keep you long. My father taught me something and thought it was brilliant. He said, Adam, it doesn't matter how anointed you are. Once people have to go to the bathroom, they don't care. And so I found that to be true. I've heard a lot of great anointed speakers, and about 45 minutes to an hour in, I don't care anymore. I got to go to the bathroom. And so by default, or I get hungry. And so, which is a bigger struggle probably in the bathroom for me. So with that being said, I want to move quickly. Father, I ask that you would make use of your word. Lord, as we step in and we begin to unpack some things and some truths, I want you, Lord, to help us to understand, to grasp, and also to have hearts that can receive. I ask that you would hide me in my areas of weakness, in my areas of foolishness, my areas that may even hinder your word from going forth. Lord, cover that by your blood now. And assist me to endeavor with these people to bring forth a fruitful seed in their life. In Jesus' name. Amen. The pruning hook. Isaiah 18:5 says this, "For before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away." What a wonderful picture of the vine dresser that later Jesus talks about. My Father is the vine dresser. Now, if you know anything about grapes, or you know anything about olives, specifically grapes, there are two seasons of pruning. The initial pruning, which is what Isaiah just referenced, comes at the moment when things begin to blossom. So at the beginning of the season, a vine dresser will come and look at the vine, and he will say, okay, there are budding plants and there are leafy tendrils that go out. Those are the little offshoots of the vine. And they will cut them away. They cut them away because they actually they remove sustenance from getting to the fruit. So in our lives, there are these seasons where we step in and we begin to feel like we're really stepping into a fruitful season. And the reward for fruitfulness, if you want to know you're fruitful, is being cut. See, sometimes we get that backwards in the kingdom, but the response to fruitfulness is pain. And so he shows up and he cuts off the showy parts. The flowering parts. Why? Because he's not after the beauty of the plant. He's after its fruitfulness. And so he shows up and he begins to cut on it. But then at the end of the season, after the harvest, there's another cutting that comes. And what happens is then the vine dresser comes and looks at branches that should have produced fruit, but didn't. And he cuts them off as well. And so there are times, and for each of you, there may be different places where this applies to you, but there are times when you first step into ministerial things, when you first step into that passionate response to God, you go, oh, I've arrived, and God's moving, and God's using me, and the first response is he cuts off all the pretty stuff. But then there's a season where you've been doing it for a while, and you've produced a harvest, and you go, man, I'm really growing in God, and he comes and he cuts again, he cuts off all the dead end branches. Now, we don't like this, but this is how he produces his image in us. In John, we all know the passage here. It says in John chapter 15 that I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. Now hear that. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you. Hear that? Neither can you, unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me you can do nothing. And if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and it withers. And the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. I'm going to stop there for a second. Some of you may have no theology where God could actually discard you. However, these are branches that were at one time connected to the vine. Understand that. He doesn't say these are random pieces. These are things at one time connected to the vine that the Father comes and says, this is not bearing fruit. And it's speaking of people. He cuts them off from the vine. They wither and then they're thrown into the fire. Whether you catch that whole picture or not, that's between you and Jesus. So moving forward and burned. If you abide in me and my word abides in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. Interesting. There are two ways. Most of the time if you ask people, how do you know that someone's a disciple? They'll say by our love for one another. And that's true. But here's the second answer. By the fruit they produce. Fruitfulness is a way that you prove you're his disciple and how you bring the Father much glory. Now, if you go a little bit further, we use that word abide a lot. Everyone uses it, especially in a worship set. Oh, I want to abide. And there's this weird connotation that means sitting and fasting in front of the worship team in a weird, esoteric, mystical experience. But if you read just 2 verses down, keep going past verse 8, you'll get to this place and it says, this is how you abide, by keeping my commandments. Just as I abide in the Father by keeping his commandments. So abiding is not something that is this feeling-based reaction. Abiding is obedience. Out of obedience comes feelings that are good and pleasant and joyful. But there's a number of movements right now that are feelings-oriented without obedience. Right. And therefore they're unfruitful. And some of you are saying, yeah, but they're growing and the Lord's blessing them. Be careful to assume that growth means blessing. Because I just told you that there are leafy things that if you're really obedient, he'll cut away. And there's a lot of plants in the body of Christ right now that are leafy and blossoming with flowers, but you haven't given them enough time to see if they produce fruit.
Wow. So good.
Let's keep going though. You say, but Adam, you said Jesus went through each of these things. Yes, he did. If you look at the life of Jesus, there's an interesting dynamic that most of us overlook. What happened between 12 and 30? It says in Luke chapter 2, verses 59 and 52, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. Now this is after he's wowed the scholars in the temple. His mother's panicked, where were you? Why would you leave us? I can imagine my wife tearing one of my boys a new one. What are you doing? We left. We straight caravanned out of town. What are you, like, son, you can't get a Lyft or an Uber over to where we live. We've already left. He says, didn't you know I'd be about my Father's business? Now at this point, though, and I want you to hear this, this is when the modern church would begin to push him. He's 12 years old. He has greater insight than the scholars. He's operating in a giftedness that is beyond question. This is when we put you on a fast track to ministry. This is when we begin to give you pulpits. This is when we begin to get you on the worship team. This is when we call you up to prophesy. Right here. Look what he's doing. And this is what happens. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. I'm going to hit some things you may not like. I know there are some worship leaders here. There's some younger people here, but I want to touch on this. Some of you are really excited about a stage, but you've never increased in wisdom, stature, and favor.
Come on.
And those things come from hiddenness.
Right.
They don't come from the stage.
Right.
You don't increase on the stage.
Come on, man.
And there's a dangerous place where if you get on the stage before you've increased, it can destroy you. So think about this. Jesus is 12 years old, and for 18 years he does nothing. How many people died and went to hell? 18-year-old Jesus is chilling, working carpentry. Next door neighbor dies. Not walking in the favor of Israel. Ever asked how many sick people suffered for 18 years? See, we have this needs-based ministry that's not appropriate. Well, there's a need, so I got to do it. That church needs a minister. That church needs me to do something. We need to have a worship team this way. We need this. We need 18 years. How many needs went unmet? See, maybe he's trying to prune something in you in hiddenness, but you're operating out of needs.
Come on.
They need me. I need to do this. It's that time of my life. I'm young and I need to do this. Nothing.
That's good, man.
See, there's a place sometimes in pruning that goes on like this. It's called waiting.
Right.
And we don't like it. Doesn't feel good. It doesn't respond to our fleshly desires. And God's going, I need you to sit. But God, don't you see the need? I have a gift. I have a talent. They have a need. See, this must be God. There's a need. I have a gift. This goes together. Jesus had all of that and sat still. I know these kind of preachings don't get amen. It's okay. I don't need an amen. I learned how to be uncomfortable and awkward a long time ago. But everything we're being modeled for in ministry right now is based on needs. We need a greeting team. We need a welcoming thing. We need this. Hey, if we're going to have a real house of prayer, we need to have a full-fledged worship team. Maybe you need to turn on some tracks and sit still until God sends. To the Tristan in the car, I said, I know there's a call on your life to go this ministry, but could you be faithful to the call of Noah? Everyone talks about the heroes of the faith. You know my hero of the faith is Noah. Could you be faithful to an assignment that for 40 years meant you were mocked and had no fruit? You only got your family, and when you got done, they got drunk and they made fun of you.
Come on. Come on.
Could you give your life to that? Well, no, of course not, because ministry is supposed to grow. Ministry is supposed to open doors. It's supposed to bring opportunity. People are supposed to understand you. They're supposed to like you. They're supposed to accept you.
Come on,
but what if the pruning God has for you is hiddenness and being misunderstood?
Come on.
And maybe you don't get to start at 12 like he could have. And maybe you don't even start at 30.
Right.
Maybe you wait until the end of your life, Abram,
Right.
to become Abraham. And maybe you live your entire life waiting on a son, and that's all you have to offer. But because of a son, you have a legacy. And instead you're trying to find a pulpit or an opportunity or fix a need. And God's going, I need you to birth something.
Come on.
See, we want to look like Jesus.
Come on.
Well, are you willing for 18 years of obscurity doing a job that has nothing to do with your call? Are you willing to grow in favor with men? You willing to grow in stature? Because I heard all weekend, we sang it, we talked about it. Oh, I want more of him. I want him to burden me. I want him to strike me. I want him to mark me. I want all these things. Okay, what if he says this is the mark? 18 years, shut your mouth and work. Put your guitar down, put your gifts down, put your prophecy down, put every part of who you are down, sit still and serve. Still want to look like Jesus? The next tool that's used is the scourging whip. In the story of Jesus, it actually goes to the wilderness, but I'm going to save that till the end. The scourging whip, this is something most of us don't like. We don't even like to talk about it. Isaiah 52 and verse 14, and many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. That's Isaiah prophesying about what would be the leftover remains of a carcass that was Jesus as he was crucified. We reference in our mind the passion, and most of us say, well, he was beaten 39 times, save one for 40, because that was the law. The problem was he wasn't beaten by Jews.
Right.
He was beaten by Romans. They had no such law.
Right.
They could have beat him as long as they wanted. Oftentimes they would beat a man until they tired out. So your idea that, 39 lashes, and then you think, well, the cat of nine tails was bad. Oh, they used the cat of nine tails, but there is no law for 39. He was handed over to Roman officials to be beaten. And some of you probably have the nice picture that they pierced him through his hand. That wouldn't work because his hands would rip off the cross. They pierced him underneath the bone through the ulnar nerve where there was deep pain, searing pain through a nerve. And he hung himself and he died by suffocation. He didn't die from the wounds. You died because you got so tired of pulling yourself up to breathe that you just chose to suffocate. That's the cross. And that's the marking. Now here's the problem that some of you aren't going to like. If you go a little bit further and you read in Isaiah, there's a passage that makes me very uncomfortable. It's Isaiah 53:10. Your translation may not quite read this way, but the New American Standard says it like this. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. The Lord was pleased to crush him. I don't know what that does inside of your theology. To realize that the Father found joy in the marring of his Son. Some of you are like, Adam, where are you going here? This is dangerous. This doesn't sound like the loving Abba I just sang to. Hold that in your mind and let's unpack it a bit. Most of us love this next verse, Romans 8:28-29. And we know I love this. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknown, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. Most of us quote the first part of that verse. And we quote it, whether or not we like it, like a Buddhist karmic circle. If bad things happen to me, something is equally good must then come to make up for the bad. And we quote it after our car wreck, and we quote it after we found out that we owe more in our taxes than we're actually getting back this year. And we quote it in these moments to say, well, this is how God's going to rain down a blessing on me. But the verse itself is actually linked to the next verse. Things work together for your good into the degree in which they conform you into his image. You see, because if not, I have to try to explain to someone who's been through deep pain how that's a good thing, or how somehow there's enough good to make up for pain. What do you say to a rape victim when you say this is how things get good? Somehow he's going to sprinkle down enough lucky charms in your life that it'll make up for that?
Come on.
What do you say to the miscarriage? What do you say to the pain? What do you say to the divorce? What do you say to the adultery? Except for that in this pain, in this deep searing pain, God can take that and use it to make his Son come alive inside of you.
Wow.
And in that way, his good can be seen in you. And you can say, it worked for my good because the ultimate good of me is to look like him.
Wow.
You said you wanted to look like him. Are you willing to be marred? Jesus walks into a temple, we know the story. He comes in and he sees that there are money changes and there are things going on. And it said that zeal, they look back and they said the zeal of his father's house would consume him. But he fashions a whip and he drives them out. And they say that this is a mark of his zeal. Now zeal means there was a joy, there's something that arose in him that this has to be done. And we go, this is when Jesus got angry. But there was also a bit of a joy. Why? Because he was cleaning his father's house. Which in their mind and in their theology was where the presence of God dwelt. Now we know that in that same story of Jesus' life, at some point he says, now listen, if you destroy this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. At that time they mocked him, saying, how could you rebuild in 3 days what it took years to make? And the author says he was speaking of his own body. Why was he doing that? Because he was explaining to them that the presence of God is no longer in a building. It's among you in flesh. And it says that God made him sin. Right? Now, I referenced that it pleased him to wound him. And I told you that Jesus had zeal to drive sin out of the presence of God. So when Jesus becomes sin, it's not that the Father wants to wound his Son. He wants to drive sin so far out of his members that the humanity of Jesus can no longer be recognized, and the only thing that is recognized is his divinity. That's why the centurion could say, surely this is the Son of God. Why? Because the humanity was driven from him to the point they couldn't recognize him. They couldn't see him as a man. Now, why did I go through all of that story? So where does the presence of God dwell now? What's Paul say? That we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So, if in zeal Jesus would drive out the sin in the house, and in joy the Father would mar his Son, then what would the Holy Spirit do to get sin out of our lives?
Right.
Hebrews. I want to go there. Consider him who endured from sinners. This is chapter 12, verses 3 through 13. From sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My sons, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. Now this is an allusion, and the reason I say allusion is because oftentimes Paul would quote the Septuagint or the Greek rendering rather than the Hebrew, but it's going back to Proverbs, where it talks about the discipline of God and the discipline of a father, as when we know Solomon's writing as unto a son. That's the motif here. And so he says, don't forget that this thing was for your good and that the Lord chastens whom he receives. We talk about this a lot. We use the word orphan spirit. But I want to explain something to you. And we don't like this word, and I'm not trying to be crass or even edgy. I'm adopted. I don't know who my father is. You know what you determine or call a man who doesn't know who his father is? The term's bastard. That's what the King James did when they said this. The way that you prove you are not a bastard, one who does not know who their father is by receiving the discipline of God. By allowing him to scourge you is actually the King James reference. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. So wait a second, Adam. You're saying if I'm fruitful, I get cut. And if I'm a son, I get beat. Yes, welcome to Christianity 101. I know it doesn't market itself well, but here's the thing. He also says that if you want to keep your life, you must lose it.
That's what he said.
For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subjected to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. I heard a number of you say, I want to be holy. You nodded, you raised your hands, you wept, you cried, I want to be holy.
Come on.
Then don't run when he pulls out the bell.
That's right.
And don't make excuses. Don't find someone else to blame. Endure discipline that you may share in his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness.
Yes.
To those who have been trained by it. See, there's the other dynamic that often is overlooked. You have to allow discipline to train you. Which means you have to not look at painful seasons as simply painful, but to ask, what lesson am I supposed to learn in the pain? Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Earlier in Hebrews it says this of Jesus. And then I want to go to the last portion of this and be done. In the days of his flesh, this is chapter 5, verses 7 through 10, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, hear this, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So wait a second, I've shown you two examples of Jesus growing in favor and wisdom and stature and learning obedience. If the Son of God had to grow in favor, stature, and wisdom and had to learn obedience, don't you assume that probably we do as well? And there are times that we eschew this, we push it away, we say, I don't want this, it's too painful, I don't like it. And we turn on every television preacher that says, no, it's your best life now. We find a guy that says, listen, if you just give 10% of what you make, God will give you all the riches in heaven. Show that to me in Paul's life. Paul shows up to Corinth and says, I had the right to receive from you, but for the sake of sowing into you, I didn't even use my right. I became a tent maker.
Yeah.
He didn't ask them for 10%. He asked them for nothing. Some of you, and I know I'm touching something here, and I'm sorry if I offend. Well, no, I'm not, but I don't want to really, whatever. So here's what it is. If you can't open your wallet and ask him how much he wants of it, your wallet's a god to you.
That's good.
If you can't open any part of your life and ask him what he wants, that thing in your life is a god to you. If you can't put it away, it's become a god to you.
Right.
I don't care if it's your money. I don't care if it's what you listen to. I don't care if it's what you watch. I don't care if it's how you eat. That one bothers me. I don't care about any of those things. What I'm saying is when the Lord comes and says, that thing is what I want. If that thing inside of you bears back and says, no, that thing's become an idol. See, I don't need to give you a list of what idols are. I need to just test your heart. What things makes you draw back from the Lord in favor of something else? That's the thing he's often going to discipline. That's the thing he's often going to touch. And here's the worst part. We say, no, I need to protect it. But we don't understand, and this is just true of anyone. If you want freedom, you must have self-control. If you want the freedom of health, you must have the self-control of how you eat and how you discipline your physical body. If you want the freedom of financial gain, you must self-control and budget how you use your money. If you want the freedom of any dynamic, if you want the freedom of being a doctor or a lawyer, you must discipline yourself in education. And all the times you say, I want freedom, but then when the discipline of God comes to produce self-control, to train you into righteousness, we go, oh, no, I just wanted freedom for free. The free's in the Word. But I heard all of you say that you want to look like it.
Come on.
The last place is the wilderness embrace. The first two are painful. The third one appears painful to the novice, but it's actually the greatest abiding place you'll ever live. But at first, it will disorient you to such a degree that you will not know how to walk or live or have your being.
Yeah.
It will terrify you. And that's why most of us don't go there. Most of us like to call the wilderness a hard season in our past. Hard seasons are not inherently wildernesses. They can be. But just because it was hard doesn't mean it was a wilderness. Sometimes we're in hard seasons because we're stupid. And maybe that's never applied to you, but it has applied to me. I've been in hard seasons before because of foolishness, because of poor choices. But the wilderness is a place that you learn things you couldn't learn otherwise. The first name of God comes in the wilderness. Now most of you in your mind just went to Abraham. That is not the first name of God. The first name of God is given to a Gentile Egyptian slave named Hagar. She goes out to the wilderness because Sarai does not like her because she's birthed a son. And she runs out into the wilderness and she's upset and she's distraught and she's ready to leave. The second time we know he gets that Ishmael gets a promise. But the first time, that's not what happens. There's two times in the wilderness she's addressed. In the first one, God shows up and she calls him by a name that is arguably my favorite name in all of the Bible for God. El Roi. You are the God who sees. See, before he's ever Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides, he's actually the God who sees. And until you realize he sees you, you'll never trust for him to provide for you. But you learn he sees you when you're alone, hidden in the wilderness, scared.
Yes.
And so God calls us out sometimes into the place of isolation. He calls us out sometimes into the place of fear. He calls us out sometimes under the water that we don't know how to walk on. And there in that moment, he reveals himself as El Roi, the God who sees. And what she says is powerful. She says, because you've seen me, I know you take care of me. Some of you can't trust him to take care of you because you've never sat yourself alone long enough to wait for him to see you. And to realize he's been looking at you all along. Because we're terrified of his gaze. But it's only in his gaze that we get the comfort to trust. And so I'm challenging some of you to quiet the noise, to quiet the distractions, to stop talking about this life of worship as though it's something that involves a stage and a sound, and go sit in a wilderness somewhere, or go sit in your room for a little bit, turn off the music and pull out a journal until he starts saying things to you that terrify every part of who you are.
Come on, man.
Because that's how you find out who you are, is when you let him look at you, and when he looks at you in ways you could never look at yourself. You realize there's something out of alignment with the way you see yourself. Tired of telling people they're sons. Why don't you let him look at you like you're a son? It'll change you. It'll mark you. It'll bring you into a place of understanding of his good pleasure towards you. But it requires you to get alone long enough. The other thing is it's in the wilderness that you get called into what God has for you. Now, most of you know the story. I'm alluding to some stories to save time. But we know the story of David. Samuel comes as a prophet to Jesse's house. He sees the first son. It's Eliab. And he says in his own mind, his own heart, surely this is the man. And God gives that great quote to him that we all know, that God does not look on the outside, but the inside of man. And we love to quote that when we think we're doing really good. We love to avoid it when we're in sin. None of you amen that, but it's true. But then Jesse sends out for David, brings David in. Now, Adam, why do you say that's of the wilderness? Well, he's tending sheep. You say, well, Adam, but again, why do you say it's of the wilderness? When we find out in the next chapter after that, in 1 Samuel 17, and verse 28, it says, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. Now, this is after David's come out. Jesse sent him out to the battlefield because Goliath is out. He really sent him out there just to make sure the boys got some food. David shows up, here's Goliath ranting and raving, and this is what it said in chapter 17, verse 28. Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? See, David was out in the wilderness. We always go, oh, he's out with his harp. Yes, he was in the wilderness. This wasn't like a fenced-in plot of land where he made sure the sheep were fed. It was in the wilderness that he was called forth. And there are some of us that are going, God, why won't you call on me? Why won't you bring the opportunity? Why won't you make room for me? And he's going, I can only call you from the wilderness. You're so busy trying to get close to a stage, thinking that if someone sees you that close, will assume you belong there.
Come on, man.
But this is where he calls you. He calls you out of a quiet, hidden place.
Get it.
That's where he calls you. That's where he makes room for you. That's where, why does he do that? Because if you don't learn how to battle in the wilderness, you'll become embarrassed in the spotlight.
Yep. You got that right.
It's in the hidden place that he lets you war and fight so that when you make your mistakes, they don't know. That's why you're being hidden. It's not the judgment of God. It's not that God doesn't want to use you. God's protecting you from what the spotlight will bring light to. Everyone, I talked to so many young men and women. I was that same young man. Oh, what it would be like to have the opportunity. Oh, what it would be like to go out. Oh, what it would be like to be known. The spotlight brings forth everything you don't want people to see. And so when you get hidden in the wilderness, that's where he can deal with you. That's where he can beat those things out of you. That's where he can test you and try you. So that when he brings you into the spotlight, it doesn't destroy you. Another story of the wilderness. Sometimes it's in the wilderness that a brother saves your life. It was in the wilderness that Joseph was thrown into a pit. Go read it. It was in the wilderness. It was in the wilderness that Joseph's entire purpose began. Hidden in a pit by a brother said, let's not kill him. Let's sell him. Sometimes we're in a place where we say we've been abandoned and attacked by those we thought we could trust the most. And in that place of wounding, in the hidden place of the wilderness, God begins the purpose of our lives. But when you avoid the wilderness at all costs, you avoid almost every great story of the Bible. It was in the wilderness that Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac. It was in the wilderness that David learned, but then also, if you go further in David's story, it was to the wilderness he went to hide. When Saul was chasing him, he went back to the wilderness. He went back to that hidden place. See, if you never learned the hidden place before you're brought up, you don't know how to go back and hide there when you're under attack.
That's right.
And so God uses these things to procure in us His image and to teach us things. Another thing that we don't understand about the wilderness, and I'm going to say this, I want you to really let this hit you in your heart. In Leviticus 16:21 and 22, it says this, "And Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, and confess over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel, and all their transgressions, all their sins. And he shall put them on the head of the goat, and send it away into the wilderness, by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat shall bear all their iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat go free in the wilderness." This is where the idea of the scapegoat comes from. There's a place in the wilderness that you get free of the accusations of the enemy, and you can put down the things of your past. Let that sit for a second, because some of you don't want to quite hear it. Some of you are being tormented by your past and by shame and by things that the enemy comes and says, "But you know you did that. You know what kind of man you used to be. You know what kind of woman you used to be. You know the things." And that thing comes up and it starts to attack you in your memory. Do you know where it dies? In the wilderness. And the very thing you're hiding from is the very place that you get set free. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. I want to pull a couple of things out of here. I have one more passage, and then I'm going to get out of your way, but I want to make sure this gets in deep. We know that he gets sent out to the wilderness after we hear that this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. But this is after 18 years of pruning. The place of pruning and the place of waiting is so that you can come into a place of identity. So that when you are tempted by the enemy, you know who you are. The reason there are hirelings in the land is because they never were pruned in the place of waiting.
Say that again, please.
The reason there are hirelings in the land is because they were never pruned in the place of waiting.
Oh, put that on the wall.
Because so often, and you hear it, I had the opportunity to get a worship leader position. I got brought in as this type of pastor. Show me that in the scripture. You can't find it. Heck, you can't find half the titles we use for ministry in the scripture. But see, what happens is, I need a position, I need an opportunity, I have a gift, there is a need, I must go, and someone bids on my service. That's what we call prostitution. When you are paid for intimacy, you become a prostitute. And we say, but no, this is because there's a need. So we justify our prostitution based on need. And then what happens is, the enemy can come and say, if you're really a son, see this need? See this problem? See this? Doesn't the word say? And we're moved because we didn't spend 18 years waiting. We didn't wait for God to send us. So all it takes is the tempter to come and say, if you're really a son, shouldn't your ministry have grown more by now? Shouldn't you have more invites? Let me show you the marketing tools for how you get invites to preach. Just put up that little podcast that you need to do. Go ahead and set up a live thing and invite no relationship. There would be no accountability. They'll see you from a screen. You know if they're watching porn on the other one. But you can teach them about the prophetic.
Knock it, man. Come on. Wow.
Why? Because you weren't taught in the place of waiting. So you can sell out.
Come on.
And watch. He comes again. He comes after that sonship. But Jesus isn't shook. Because he knew he was a son at 12. See, when you really know you're a son, need does not motivate you. Obedience does. That's how you can walk to the pool of Bethsaida and see an entire group of lame people around a pool waiting for an angel to trouble the water. Now watch this. Read the story over and over again. They brought all the multitudes. Jesus healed everywhere and cast out all the demons. Over and over again. But then he comes to a pool where everyone's gathered for healing. He goes to one. Maybe the reason he's not using you for healing is because you would run to a hospital.
Whoa. Don't get that.
Maybe the reason he's not giving you the miraculous is because it would be a Facebook status.
Whoa. Come on, man. Do it.
What if he only wants you to heal one stage 4 cancer victim this week?
Come on.
What if he only wants you to do one thing this week? And the problem is you have power now and you have anointing and there's a need. So you run out. And see, this is what the waiting kills. Is you don't care if you come to a meeting and prophesy. You don't care if they understand you. You don't care if they like you because you understand your assignment. And then you're not shook by people going, I'm not sure where you fit.
Come on, man.
Because here's what's going to happen. If you really are of God, you'll have people who don't know where you fit.
Right.
How do I know? The religious didn't like him. The zealots didn't like him. The Romans didn't like him. Everyone didn't like him. Stop trying to find your tribe. Find your father in the hidden place of the wilderness. Then your tribe will find you, and you won't even care if they accept you or not. Man, we got a growing ministry. There's needs in the land. Now watch. If he can't get you an identity, he'll do this to you. He'll offer you a shortcut.
Yep. Every time.
The scourging is too painful. You don't really want to suffer. You don't want to suffer the obscurity. You don't want to suffer being left out of conversations. You don't want to suffer the judgment. You don't want to suffer the financial hardship. You don't want to suffer the hours and the waiting and the pain. You don't want to suffer the judgments and the accusations and the conversations behind your head. You don't want to suffer that. So here, let me show you how you can get a great ministry position. Here, there's a position at this church down the street. They got 5,000 members. You're going to come into a paid salary of 401k and some insurance.
Come on.
Do you know how many great men and women of God have destroyed their destiny over a 401k and insurance? Who stopped burning? Who stopped fighting? Because it was easier. It was easier. You think I'm saying this because I don't know it? I had the offer. I remember I was in a church of 30 people. Worship was terrible. Things were dying. I didn't even like being there. I don't like Virginia. I get a call from Rob Stearns, who's a great man up in Buffalo, a good friend of mine. He goes, come be on staff for me. We don't have a prophet here. We could use a prophet. And I'm not trying to knock Rob Stearns at all. What I'm saying is he was legitimately offering me something that he felt could help his ministry. But to me it was a test. Adam, I'll send you out to all the large churches in the nation. I'm going to have you start a school for me, and I'll put you in 5,000 member churches to recruit for me, plus I'll pay you a salary. I had 3 kids, and I wasn't even working a job. I was in school, trusting God for money to come in. Do you know how tempting that thing was? Call a father in my life. Some of you don't understand the value of fathers and mothers in the kingdom. They're not supposed to tell you what you're like. So I call a father and he goes, Adam, why do you want to birth an Ishmael? I want to say this in this room. I want you to hear me. Because I didn't go, I got to birth something. Unpack that because some of you didn't understand what I meant. Because I didn't go, I got to birth something. What do I mean? You can go to Lynchburg, Virginia, and there's a prophetic mark in that city, and there are prophets that have been raised up because I said no to an opportunity that would have given me opportunities. And I said, I'll stay here and carry something till it comes full term. And I'll carry it in pain, and I'll carry it in frustration, and I'll carry it in misunderstanding, and I'll keep fighting, and I'll keep striking the ground till I bring forth children in this place.
That's good.
It's not easy. The shortcut sounds good. It looks good. It makes sense.
Come on, Adam.
And no one, I went to prophets. Oh man, I'm going to unpack this. I'm sorry. I went to prophets and I said, you have to help me. What am I supposed to do? And I had 5 prophets on one side of the discussion and 5 prophets on the other. And when I say prophets, I'm not talking about run-of-the-mill slow. I'm talking about guys who hear God. 5 on one side, 5 on the other. See, all this confirmation noise, you can get confirmation to do whatever you want.
You got that right.
There's a passage in Ezekiel that says that he'll prophesy according to the idol in your heart. Ever considered that? That when something becomes such an idol in your heart, becomes so emotionally necessary, that God will actually say yes to the idol in your heart? And you'll think it was God that sent you, but it was him partnering with your own idolatry? You know, God would never do that. Really, a lying spirit appeared before the throne with Ahab, and he said, go and prosper. You don't think lying spirits don't come and speak still now? Do you know what set me? It wasn't prophetic confirmation. It was a seated father who said, don't make a fool of yourself. But the shortcut was there. That was the same father who then a year later took me through discipline. This sermon didn't come because I got witty insight, because I studied it. I went through a season of discipline in my life. I never even shared about it yet publicly. It was 2+ years ago now. I went to a wedding. Man, okay. Went to a wedding. I'm adopted. I carried wounds of rejection. I carried anger. I carried so many things I had never addressed. And I had learned how to behavior modify it. I knew how to be good enough to fit the mold to be the prophet. And some of that anger was justified because you're prophetic. That's what that was. And everything, they fit you however they need to fit you. And this thing was underneath the surface. It was hurting me and it was painful. And I get to a wedding and one of my closest friends rejects me in a way that I didn't know how to take. And I saw red and I assaulted him. There's prophet extraordinaire. There's a leader of a church. I call my leader and I say, same father who shut me down said don't go. I said, hey, your prophet just did this. I came home and he stripped me of all ministry. Wasn't allowed to prophesy. Wasn't allowed to preach. Wasn't allowed to travel. I had to call conferences and cancel all my traveling opportunities. I had been ordained 6 months before me and I thought I really arrived. And he said, let's take you out. And all of a sudden, each of these 3 tools were used on me in one season. I began being pruned, I began being beat, and I was alone. Lost 1/3 of my income. I had children. I didn't know how to pay bills. And I had to go sit in my office and weep and weep and weep because I didn't know what this looked like and I didn't know why it was happening. I didn't know why God would let this go on. I didn't understand. I'm telling you a sermon because it's a nice idea. I'm telling you how to get to where God wants you to be and how to do it without man having to be a part of the agency. Because when he uses a man to cut you, and when he uses a man to beat you, and when he uses a man to put you into obscurity, it's far more painful than if you do it yourself.
Yeah.
I spent 7 months just hidden. Went through inner healing, took hours and hours to undo wounds and trauma and pain and abuse and people using me for the gift and all of the things that were inside of me. It wasn't some fun, joyous ride. It was the most painful thing of my life. If my wife was here, she could tell you she got a better husband and a better father out of the deal. You see, he's not after your ministry. He's not after your opportunity. He's not after you fixing the need. You know what he wanted in me? He wanted me to know I was loved and it didn't matter if I prophesied. He wanted me to know I was safe and it didn't matter if I ever met another need. He wanted my wife to have a husband. He wanted my kids to have a father. He was tired of me disconnecting for the ministry. He was tired of me doing things because it had to be done. And he wanted me to learn how to sit, how to rest, and how to wait. This is one of the hardest sermons I've ever had to preach in to share it. It's much easier. I could have stopped right there. But you need to understand I'm trying to save you from getting caught up in a rat race that will destroy you. Some of you, if you're not careful, you'll leave this place because it doesn't grow fast enough. Because you get tired of the fact that Tammy will wait forever on God. Say, why can't it get more ordered? Why can't it have this? Why doesn't it have that? Do you know what happened? I got to that church because God told me to go off a suicide attempt. 9 years later, then the same house, I'm being disciplined. And in every part of it, God was protecting me in hiddenness. Some of you have stuff in your life you don't even want to talk about. This is the reward of the cutting. This is the reward of the scourging. This is the reward of the wilderness. Who is that coming up from the wilderness?
Yeah.
Leaning on her beloved. Under the apple tree, I awakened you. There your mother was a neighbor with you. There she who bore you was a neighbor. Set me as a... Set me as a seal on your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave. It flashes, and our flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. You don't get to that place if you don't let him cut on you, if you don't let him move you, if you don't let him take you to the place of hiddenness and obscurity. But when you've been there, you don't care what man has to say. You don't care if they understand. You don't care if they like you. You don't get motivated by the lesser things because you've learned how to lay on his breast in the quiet place and say, if nothing else comes, I have to.
Yes. Yes. Hear that.
Then obedience becomes easy. Then assignments can be endured. Then difficult times don't seem as bad because you realize you're leaning on him. And then you realize the reason he cut you, and the reason he disciplined, and the season of hiddenness was so you could have him and be like him and look like him. Some of you prayed some things this weekend I don't think you took inventory of. The word says that a man who's going to build a house talks about him taking inventory of what that will cost. It speaks of David in that, who laid up for the temple for his son to build it. Some of you missed your season to build. Some of you got blood in too much warfare. But some of you, and I'm speaking to some people that are coming to this house too, I don't really care, we'll just say it. Some of you are called to set up for those who will build. That's what it means to mother and to father. That sometimes you don't build your dream. You just lay aside the supplies for your son or your daughter to build. I don't know where you're at. Some of you might be a season of pruning. Some of you might be disciplined. Some of you might be the wilderness. Some of you might have no idea what to do with what I just said to you, but I'm trying to tell you that God's purpose for you is not a platform. It's not an opportunity. It's not some idea of ministry. It's to get into a place where you learn what it is to lay on your beloved and to be satisfied by that and only that. And there are seasons that will flow in you, and there are seasons you'll withdraw and he'll call you back. There are seasons where he'll cut afresh. There are seasons over and over again. But if you can learn that that is the sacrifice, that being you, Romans 12:1, that we lay ourselves down as sacrifices, that is our reasonable service. Then you get everything else. And the best part is, then you won't want the platform. Then you won't care about the spotlight. Then you won't care about any of it. And you'll be able for him to be seen in the midst of it.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. For more information, please go to www.frontlinefire.org.